In June of 2013, Naughty Dog released an action-adventure game known as The Last of Us to critical acclaim. It showcased graphic violence and third-person stealth gameplay that, at the time, made the game quite divisive. However, from a narrative perspective, it was heralded as one of the best stories ever told in gaming. If you asked me what my favorite game was at any point throughout the past 7 years, I would have told you without hesitation, The Last of Us. The marriage between gameplay, deep narrative, and well-developed characters is the perfect cocktail that I look for when purchasing a single-player story-driven experience. Now it is 2020, and Naughty Dog has finally released a follow-up to their hit classic in the form of The Last of Us Part 2. I completed this game on June 24th, 6 days after release. It took me 23 hours and 40 minutes to complete. For full transparency, I have never been paid by Naughty Dog to review a game. I purchased this game at release for full price with my own money. With all that out of the way, this is my critical analysis of The Last of Us Part 2. As a follow-up, I believe it is impossible to analyze this game completely without spoiling elements of the story. I will begin with a more broad perspective of the game. Take this as your soft spoiler warning. I will provide another hard spoiler warning before diving into the narrative elements of the game. Also, this is the best time for me to warn you that I will be showcasing footage from The Last of Us Part 2. This game is excessively violent. In simple terms, it is a game about bad people doing bad things to one another. I do not recommend this game to anyone who struggles with violence, body horror, gore, and cannot recommend this game to children. Viewer discretion is advised. At this time, I also want to thank the team over at MKIceandFire for providing game footage, as well as the team over at COGConnected for providing footage of the game's accessibility features. I have provided links to their videos in the description. I highly recommend you check out their content and support these great gaming channels. To begin, visually, The Last of Us Part 2 is one of the most impressive games I have ever seen. It is on par with games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Death Stranding. Naughty Dog has once again found a way to squeeze every ounce of juice out of the console's hardware. I played on a PlayStation 4 Pro with an OLED display, and it was awe-inspiring. It was akin to the first time I booted up Red Dead 2. Beams of light creep through the trees as you walk through snowy landscapes, rain dampens the streets of a war-torn Seattle, water rushes through the scenery and becomes a very prominent component throughout many scenes in the game. I have spoken with folks who have played this on a base PS4, and the reaction has been similar. It really is amazing to see the graphical fidelity that companies can accomplish on the same hardware that existed 7 years prior. The Last of Us Part 2 also makes fantastic use of the HDR feature if you have access to a PS4 Pro and HDR display. Brilliant use of light and shadow are showcased throughout the entirety of the game. You will transition from vibrant, colorful scenes to bleak, shadowy depths throughout the 25 to 30 hour playthrough. It also features a high contrast mode, which will highlight enemies, collectibles, and allies for you on the battlefield in stark contrast from the scenery. The accessibility features offered in this game are surprisingly robust. Naughty Dog has gone out of their way to ensure that anyone who wants to experience this game has the ability to do so. There are presets that allow for vision, hearing, and motor accessibility, alternate controls for movement and vehicles, input remapping for control schemes, assistance with camera controls, weapon swapping, auto pickup, and more. There are also features that allow you to scale and customize your HUD, as well as screen magnification, subtitles for those that are hearing impaired, text-to-speech, and even enhanced traversal tools. There is customization all the way down to how aggressive you, the player, can be, your enemies, and the aggressiveness of your allies. I am not exaggerating. It is remarkable the lengths that this studio went to ensure that they created an adventure that is accessible to anyone who wants to experience it. The soundtrack is once again marvelous. Gustavo Santaolalla returns to deliver a touching follow-up to the composition of the first game. The main instruments showcased being the acoustic guitar and the banjo. The game perfectly transitions from touching acoustic moments to loud swells akin to movies like Inception. And the music not only plays a major element in setting the tone for the game's many cutscenes, but also a literal element in the game's story. My only critique for the music is that I wish there was more of it. Most of your time spent in the game will be in silence, listening to the footsteps of your prey as you stalk them through the overgrown streets of Seattle. If you're familiar with The Last of Us Part 1, you will recognize iconic guitar riffs from the game. However, there are also hidden gems in the form of guitar covers of popular songs sprinkled throughout the 30-hour playtime. The gameplay, unfortunately, is the weakest part of the game. This is the part where I struggle with recommending this game to everyone. I wouldn't say that the gameplay is bad. On the contrary, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It has a heavy focus on third-person stealth combat, which is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. I found the combat engaging, but I tend to gravitate towards stealth in games like Metal Gear Solid, Dishonored, and even choose a sneaky approach in games like Skyrim. By placing the game on an easier difficulty, you can change how loud you want to take on each encounter. This will increase the amount of resources you find throughout the map, as well as reduce the amount of damage you take from the enemies. You can also increase your allies' aggression if you want more assistance in clearing out the many rooms of rebels, hunters, and infected that you will stumble across throughout your journey. I played on normal difficulty for my initial playthrough, and found that resources were trickled throughout at a fairly even pace. I had enough resources to feel that my ammunition was scarce and that the other tools at my disposal would be best used to accomplish the task at hand. Similar to the first game, you will have access to tools like Molotov cocktails, trip mines, stun grenades, etc. Some of these tools have been improved upon and relieve some pain points from the game's predecessor. One example is Ellie's switchblade, which is provided at the beginning of the game. This can be used to clear out hunters and infected silently from the shadows. Unlike the disposable shivs that Joel used in The Last of Us Part 1, this tool is reusable. However, no matter how well I played, I inevitably found myself in instances where my resources had been depleted and I needed to focus on stealth to merely find a way to escape the situation I was in. Luckily, most encounters in the game, similar to the first, do not require you to engage with the enemy combatants at all. If you can sneakily navigate your way from one side of the room to another, you can circumvent whole engagements and save those precious bullets for another day. Many encounters resulted in me choosing 2 or 3 targets to dispatch before sneaking past the rest in a hasty getaway. The gameplay does begin to feel long in the tooth in the latter parts of the game. Around 3/4 of the way through the story, I found myself wanting to continue progressing through the narrative. However, the idea of playing the game did feel a bit like a chore. This could be a fault in the game's pacing. Games like The Last of Us have such a delicate marriage between gameplay and story that it is incredibly difficult to separate the two. The gameplay directly mirrors the themes that the story is trying to tell, and the slow-paced combat that it forces you into also helps to reinforce the world that Naughty Dog is creating. Everything you do is intentional. Everything you pick up is limited. This world is brutal and unforgiving, which means you may need to turn and embrace your own brutality in order to survive. It is effective, but can wear out its welcome with long sessions. So let's talk about that brutality. This game is violent, and may be hard for some people to stomach. The guns are brutal, the melee weapons are savage. Enemies will call out to their friends as you gun them down, dogs will mourn the deaths of their owners, and owners will mourn the deaths of their dogs. It's hard, it's heavy, and it is powerful. What Naughty Dog pursues here is an attempt to make you, the player, think about what it is that you are doing. In games like Uncharted, you play as Nathan Drake, a charismatic good guy mowing down hundreds of mercenaries. You don't know who these mercenaries are. They don't have names, and it's never really established that their lives have any meaning. But in real life, these people would be real people. They have families and friends, they have relationships, they grew up, they were children, they have history, they have felt love and loss, happiness, sorrow, fear, pain, and anger. Every step in their life has led them to this moment in time, and you, the player, need to decide if simply because they are in front of you, do they deserve to die? It's the post-apocalypse, and you have every right to defend yourself. But when presented with the option of sneaking past a few guards versus murdering a whole squad of friends, what is it that you decide to do? In this way, the gameplay again reinforces the story that Naughty Dog is trying to tell. I'm not going to say they completely nail what they are aiming for. However, I applaud this studio for making an attempt at humanizing these NPCs, and this is the perfect franchise to do so. With all that out of the way, here is your hard spoiler warning. I am going to talk about the story that Naughty Dog tells in The Last of Us Part 2. If you have played the first game or found anything that I have said here interesting, I urge you to go and play this franchise. You deserve to experience this series firsthand. Alright, let's really talk about The Last of Us Part 2. The game opens with Joel cleaning a guitar that he will later give to Ellie and sharing with Tommy the events that took place in the first game. This is important for anyone who has not experienced those events. The Last of Us Part 2 is not a game that requires you to have played the original, but I would say it helps immensely if you are walking into this game with previous experience and a history with Ellie and Joel. In the conversation, Joel explains that the Fireflies, a rogue band of freedom fighters, had plans to operate on Ellie to find a cure for the cordyceps fungus that is attacking mankind. For those not familiar, Ellie is the only known person alive that is immune to the virus. She was bit at an early age during the events of The Last of Us Left Behind DLC, but never became infected. Those who are infected turned into mindless creatures. For all intents and purposes, they're mushroom zombies. The events of the first game take you across the country to deliver Ellie to a hospital in Salt Lake City. However, Joel was not aware that in order to create a cure, they would need to remove Ellie's brain, essentially killing her in the process. Unable to cope with this outcome, Joel proceeds to break Ellie out of the hospital, killing the surgeons in the process, as well as Marlene, his friend of many years, who trusted him with getting Ellie to Salt Lake City in the first place. Some could argue that this is a selfish act on Joel's part, but I have always pictured it as a selfless act, where Joel is putting Ellie before himself, and really before mankind. Upon escaping the hospital, Ellie asks Joel what happened. He lies to her, and says that she was not special, that they found dozens of other people that were immune, and that there was no cure. You are left with a cliffhanger ending, a long close-up on Ellie's face as she questions what Joel has said. It is left up to interpretation as to whether Ellie believes Joel's lie or if she knows that he is lying. We then learn that the events in The Last of Us Part 2 take place roughly 4 years after the end of the first game. Ellie has now grown up and is 19 years old. Both Ellie and Joel are living in Jackson, Wyoming, with his brother Tommy and his wife Maria. Tommy and Maria have created an advanced community filled with shops, jobs, schools, and even community events like movie nights and dances. It is the closest I think you can get to normal life in the post-apocalypse. Here we meet some of Ellie's friends, notably Jesse, a young adult who seems more than capable and takes on the mantle of a strong leader for his band of survivors. We also meet his ex-girlfriend Dina, who we later learn through conversation and diary entries that Ellie has had a crush on for quite some time. We learn that Dina kissed Ellie at the dance the night before, which resulted in Joel intervening in her business, and we also learn that Ellie feels upset that Joel thinks she cannot stand up for herself. Each member of the camp has roles to play and jobs to fulfill. For Joel, Tommy, Ellie, Dina, and Jesse, that entails going on scouting missions to clear out any infected in the area, as well as scavenge for supplies and survivors. We follow Ellie and Dina as they go on their expedition and learn about their relationship. Meanwhile, Joel and Tommy go on their own adventure. The game does a fantastic job of humanizing Dina in these early sections. I especially liked the banter that they have in Eugene's library basement. The two stumble upon an indoor weed farm and proceed to share a joint, reminisce about the events of the night before, and ultimately end up getting intimate on a dirty old stoner's couch. And they say romance is dead. Meanwhile, however, we change perspective to a new character we have never met before, Abby. Abby follows one of her friends, Owen, through the woods in what appears to be a blizzard. It is revealed to us once they find the settlement of Jackson that Abby and Owen are looking for someone. They do not reveal who this individual is, but we can only assume it is someone from the encampment. Owen goes back to the cabin, but hell-bent on finding out more, Abby pushes forward, stumbling upon infected along the way. This is the first of many instances where Naughty Dog utilizes dramatic irony in this story. We, the player, are quickly switching perspectives between multiple characters. We know that a blizzard is coming. We know that there is another group of survivors out in the wild, and we also find out from Abby's perspective that she is tracking someone in the snow. Our assumption at this time is that she can either be tracking Dina and Ellie or Joel and Tommy. However, from Ellie's perspective, we are able to see the ski lodge that is seen in Abby's previous view. Now we know almost certainly she is on a collision path with Tommy and Joel. Eventually, Abby is overcome by a horde of infected, but just as it seems she is doomed to die, she is rescued by none other than Joel and Tommy. Together, the three of them are able to escape. Tommy introduces himself and his brother. Abby tells them her friends are staying at a mansion nearby that is fortified, and they can go there to weather the storm. Joel and Tommy agree, and they set off for Sanctuary. And thus, we have our first major spoiler of the game, and a major point of contention for many fans of the series. Unbeknownst to Joel and Tommy, the individual that Abby's group was looking for was in fact Joel. In my initial playthrough, I assumed that Joel was the person they were hunting, and I also assumed they were Fireflies, which turns out to be true. It is revealed later in the story that Abby and her friends are all ex-Fireflies from Salt Lake City. Presumably, they would have known the events that took place in the first game, and may have also known Marlene. The first game was very much about Joel and Ellie's journey. It was a story about finding hope and purpose in the world when all is lost. However, I would always consider the first Last of Us as a story specifically about Joel's journey. It was largely about Joel's growth and learning to cope with the loss of his daughter and care again in a world that shook him to his core. This game is about the consequences of your actions, specifically the consequences of Joel's actions at the end of the first game, and how those consequences help to form Ellie's journey. To put it simply, The Last of Us Part 1 is a story about Joel. The Last of Us Part 2 is a story about Ellie. In a room with all of her friends present, Abby tortures and mutilates Joel with a golf club. And to add insult to injury, this is after Joel saved her life. We, the player, are forced to watch as one of our favorite characters in the series is beaten to death in the most gruesome way. It was very powerful, very emotional, and very effective. Eventually, Ellie makes her way to the mansion and finds the group in the basement. She is brought to the ground and forced to watch as her father figure is stripped from her. I remember feeling this strong vitriol for these characters. You feel what Ellie is feeling. And as Ellie swears that she will kill Abby, you, the player, want to help her do it. Some fans have argued that Naughty Dog should not have killed Joel this early in the game, but I disagree. Naughty Dog is trying to tell a story about revenge, and the repercussions of revenge. The only way we, the player character, would want to enact Ellie's revenge is if they killed one of our favorite characters. You could put Tommy in the same situation as Joel, and it would not be nearly as effective. For a while, I thought they might be planning to kill Dina, but even then we had not had enough time for their relationship to develop in order to really feel that call of action if they killed her. Furthermore, Joel is not a good guy. I love the character, but Joel has done some really questionable stuff. He has plenty of blood on his hands, and it was only a matter of time that the events that took place in Salt Lake City caught up to him, metaphorically and literally. Lastly, The Last of Us is not a series where characters are promised heroic deaths. It is in fact the opposite. Many times a character will die simply from getting caught with their guard down. It helps to reinforce how dangerous the world really is, and how fragile life is. I have heard the argument that Joel would have been smart enough to not reveal his real name, and I agree with this. But at the time when Joel says his name, Tommy has already revealed who they were minutes before directly to Abby. Joel may be hardened by the world because of his trek across the country, but Tommy has always been more welcoming than his older brother. Tommy even offers to take these newcomers back to Jackson to resupply. But I digress. So now we have the premise of our adventure. It is a revenge tale where Ellie is going to go and murder Abby and all of her friends for killing Joel. And at this point, I felt put off by the idea of going on a murder spree. For starters, the community Ellie and her friends are living in seemed ideal. I didn't want to put Ellie in unneeded danger, even if it meant I would be avenging Joel. I had to ignore my personal feelings in order to continue playing the game, which is one major critique I have with the game. Throughout the process of playing The Last of Us Part 2, I felt the urge to stop the cycle of violence myself by putting the controller down. However, there is no way for me to stop it until the story is done telling itself. In that way, the gameplay is very unsettling, because I'm watching a character that I love do things that I know she shouldn't do. I think this is intentional, and Naughty Dog wants us to question whether or not Ellie is justified in this cycle of violence. It's also revealed to us that Tommy has gone ahead of Ellie to avenge Joel, and wants Ellie to stay behind. He already has a head start on his way to Seattle, and Maria, knowing she can't stop Ellie, asks for her to bring her husband back alive. Dina also agrees to go on this journey, presumably to make sure Ellie is safe. The game then drops you off in Seattle, where you will spend the vast majority of your playthrough. Seattle is a great looking city, but I would be lying if I didn't get bored of the same look and feel of overgrown nature and crumbled civilization. In the beginning, I really loved traversing it, but about 12 to 15 hours into the game, I was hoping for a change of scenery that wasn't the inside of a building. I understand now why you spend so much time in Seattle, and I understand why it is important that you spend that time there, but initially I wanted something that was more like the globe-trotting I come to expect in Naughty Dog's games. They create such beautiful and well-realized worlds that I get excited to see the different environments their team can play with. It also feels strange when we first enter Seattle because Seattle Day 1 plays like an open-world game. There's a large map that you're free to explore at your leisure. You can go directly down the critical path, but there are a ton of buildings to explore and secrets to find. I was convinced this was done as a proof of concept, so that Naughty Dog can decide if their future titles could be successful in an open world format. Personally, it was not working for me, but I am one of the few gamers that enjoy a heavy narrative and a linear experience. I play games like they are interactive movies. When the game gives me a pressing objective, in this case find Tommy and murder Abby, I feel irresponsible by wasting time digging through buildings that are not on the critical path. On the flip side, I feel obligated to search all the buildings to find any trinkets, upgrades, or lore pieces that are sprinkled around the world. As the player, I feel conflicted, which I think is to the game's detriment. However, I did enjoy spending this time to get to know Dina more. We have some great banter between her and Ellie, some more friendly flirting, and some touching moments as we learn more about her character, the death of her sister, and her belief in God and religion. At this point, I thought the rest of the game was going to be open world, and I was worried I wouldn't enjoy it. However, shortly after day 1, the game falls into a rather linear path that I believe is much more effective to Naughty Dog's highly cinematic experiences. We spend 3 days in Seattle, hunting down Abby and her friends. We go from one to the next as we learn more about Abby's whereabouts, and each step of the way, we watch as Ellie continues to progress down this path of violence. It's also shortly after day 1 that we learn that Dina is pregnant with Jesse's child. Dina wasn't sure when they began their journey. Crippled with sickness, she is forced to hide out in a theater that we will go back to a few times as a pseudo-home base in the heart of Seattle. Eventually, Jesse arrives to help get Ellie out of a sticky situation, but even Jesse is taken aback when Ellie believes it is more important to pursue Abby than it is to go and help Tommy. This reinforces Ellie's thirst for revenge, and again makes us feel uncomfortable at the danger she puts herself and her friends in, all in the name of avenging Joel. This was the moment where I realized this has to be about more than just revenge. Ellie is well past the emotions tied to Joel's death, and has had weeks, if not months, to cope with the loss. This is about Ellie needing to find a memory of Joel that isn't his ultimate demise. This is also a good place to mention that in a flashback, Ellie is shown going back to the hospital in Salt Lake City. There she finds a voice recorder that reveals the truth to her. She was in fact special, the only chance for humanity and a cure. She confronts Joel, who shows up to rescue her, and asks why he lied to her. Joel says it would have killed her, and Ellie, hurt and confused, replies that she will go back to Jackson, but the two of them are done. She leaves Joel standing there alone, having lost the trust and respect of Ellie. There are many moments in this game where Naughty Dog is, for lack of a better term, burying the lead. We have moments where we know more information must be revealed in the future, but we're not sure when that information will be revealed to us. So now we know that Joel and Ellie had a falling out after Ellie learned the truth. What we don't know is how and when, if ever, they mend their relationship. Anyway, back in Seattle, Ellie decides that she has to get Abby, leaves Jesse to hunt Tommy, and makes her way toward the aquarium where she believes Abby is hiding out. However, once she gets there, she finds that Abby is nowhere to be seen. She is attacked by a dog, which she dispatches, and finds 2 more of Abby's friends. A scuffle ensues, and Ellie is forced to kill the couple in self-defense. However, unbeknownst to Ellie, the woman who she murders is pregnant. She has a mental breakdown and is later saved by Tommy and Jesse, who bring her back to the theater. Ellie awakens in the theater with plans to leave as soon as possible and return to Jackson. She thanks Jesse for coming back for her and agrees that the hunt for Abby can finally end. Tommy goes to prepare his things, but we later hear a scuffle happening in the main lobby. We enter the lobby to see none other than Abby with a gun to Tommy's head. She very quickly kills Jesse and confronts Ellie, saying, "You killed my friends. We let you both live and you wasted it." At this point, if you're like me, you thought, this is it. This is the final battle. I'm gonna kill this girl with whatever in this theater looks most like a golf club. However, everything prior to this scene, roughly 10 to 15 hours of gameplay, is only half of the game. It is at this moment where we have our second major point of division amongst the fans of this series. We rewind 3 days and find ourselves playing as none other than Abby. At the time, I thought this was simply a flashback or a vignette. However, shortly after I found myself picking up pills, ammunition, I had whole new skill trees, I lost all my guns, I had new tools, and it was apparent to me exactly what Naughty Dog was doing. I was going to play through all 3 days again, but from the perspective of Abby. Unfortunately, that means that I would have to stay in Seattle for 3 more days. But now I was going to get a new perspective. I was going to watch the world from Abby's point of view. I was going to play through 3 days worth of content, all while knowing exactly how it all ends, with nothing that I can do to stop it. Yet again, another incredible use of dramatic irony. For some, this is a major pain point in the game, and I think you either enjoy or are disappointed by The Last of Us Part 2 based on how you react to the Abby sections. In the beginning, I disliked Abby, but as the game progressed, I found myself drifting farther away from Ellie as she continued her cycle of violence, and I questioned whether all of this death and destruction was justified. This made me very interested in what I could learn from Abby's perspective, and also made the moment-to-moment with Abby so much more heartbreaking. I saw through my playthrough as Abby how she is a direct literary foil to Ellie. I met the dog that I would later murder as Ellie. I played fetch with that dog. I learned about Abby's relationship with the WLF, a faction similar to the Fireflies that Abby dissents from, as she learns more about the cruelty they are enacting on a rebel faction known as the Seraphites. They even use a derogatory term to refer to these people as scars. I learned about Abby and Owen's forbidden love. I started to care about Owen. I shared cider on Christmas with him in the aquarium. I got to know Manny, I got to know Mel, I got to understand the complexity of the relationship between Abby, Mel, and Owen. And most powerful of all, I learned where Abby came from. I learned that Abby's father was the surgeon from the first game tasked with completing Ellie's surgery, one of the few characters that you have to kill in The Last of Us Part 1 to progress through the game. It was so beautiful when it all started coming together. I am watching 2 mirror versions of the same character going through 2 different arcs on the same path. Where Ellie is on her journey for revenge, Abby is on her journey for redemption. In that way, I started connecting more with Abby, because although she murdered one of my favorite characters, she was striving to end the cycle of violence. In Abby's playthrough, you save people. You meet up with a brother and sister who are trying to escape the Seraphites, former Seraphites themselves, and help the younger brother get aid to his sister when she needs it. You bond with this new character named Lev. In a way, playing as Abby and Lev is a direct parallel to playing the first game as Joel and Ellie. Just like how Ellie taught Joel to have hope, Lev teaches Abby that she can still be redeemed. We also learn that Lev was born with female anatomy, but identifies as a male. This is another topic that created a lot of buzz on the internet, and I think Naughty Dog tackled it beautifully. We learned that Lev originally was assigned to be a wife to one of the elders in his tribe. However, in an act of defiance, he shaves his head like the soldiers of his people and is in turn hunted for his heresy. Early on, when we are fighting with Lev, the other Seraphites will occasionally refer to him as his dead name, Lily. In fact, after one encounter, Lev asks, "Did you hear what they called me?" and then says, "Do you want to ask me about it?" Abby responds, "Do you want me to ask you about it?" and he says no. And that's it. It is dropped for the rest of the game, up until his sister Yara reveals that Lev is definitely a trans character. I think this is done expertly, because Lev's gender does not define who he is as a character. To Abby, it only matters that Lev feels comfortable being who he is. And Lev's importance is not that he is transsexual, but that he provides hope and understanding to Abby. He is the impetus for Abby to change her ways and seek redemption. Lev eventually gets into an argument with his sister Yara and goes to rescue his mom on the Seraphite Island. This is after we learn that the WLF, led by Isaac, plan to invade the island and kill all of the Seraphites. We go to the island to rescue Lev and find ourselves in the middle of a firefight between the two factions. This was another point in the game where I struggled. At this point, I didn't want to kill the WLF because I have a history with them from Abby's perspective. And I didn't want to kill the Seraphites because being with Lev had taught me that these people are deeper than just killing machines. They have a culture and a society. Only a few of them are soldiers, and the rest are peaceful people. Meanwhile, I am watching as their entire village is being burnt to the ground. It is complete chaos. I think you can justify this by saying that Lev is your people and that you will do anything to protect this boy, the same way that Joel would do anything to protect Ellie, but at the time I felt confused and wished that instead of giving me the option to kill people, I could simply escape under the blanket of chaos. In fact, every moment after I met Lev made me feel guilty about anyone that I needed to kill in order to progress the game. We get in a fistfight with a giant dude, but eventually escape back to the aquarium where the big reveal happens. We watch as Abby finds the corpses of both Mel and her lover, Owen. Again, we know what Abby is going to find when she enters the aquarium on day 3, and are completely helpless to stop the sorrow that she's about to experience. It's impactful, and it is heartbreaking. We then go back to the theater and have gone full circle. We see the same exchange between Ellie and Abby from Abby's perspective, and are thrust into a fight between the two. Now I am very conflicted. I want Abby to not die because I see the depth of her character and everything she has gone through. Her friends have all been murdered and she is justified in hunting Ellie. But I don't want Ellie to die because I love Ellie. I don't want Ellie to succeed because I know that Ellie needs to be redeemed. It's not just about killing all of Abby's friends. It's also about all the other people that are dead on our path to this point just because we started this revenge journey in the first place. It was a very emotionally heavy scene to watch play out. Once again, Naughty Dog is asking the player to engage in something that they don't want to. I wanted an option to drop it, for our characters to find a way to understand one another's plight. But the player is put into an omniscient state where we see the full picture and our characters are blind to the point of view of their counterpart. We understand the complexities and the depth that this journey has caused, but Abby and Ellie are trying to solve the problem only with the information that they have at the time. Naughty Dog is showing us that in order to understand somebody, you have to walk in their shoes, and you, the player, literally did that. In the end, Abby is able to get the upper hand on Ellie. She even is able to grab Dina, but just as she's about to kill Dina, Lev stops her. In a moment of clarity, Abby decides once again that she will stop this cycle of violence and walks away, leaving Ellie and Dina in a bloody mess in the theater. This reveals the one significant plot hole that I have with the game. I have no idea how Ellie gets out of this theater with a pregnant and sick Dina, as well as Tommy, who I thought was shot in the head, but whatever. It is what it is. It doesn't make a ton of sense, but if this is ruining your immersion, come on, guy. We then flash forward some time to a ranch house on a hill. Once again, I thought this was the end of the game. There are so many conclusions to this game, it's like the third Lord of the Rings movie. We find Ellie and Dina are living the life they always wanted with their son JJ. The house is beautiful. There is a picturesque sunset on the horizon. We play music, dance with Dina, and help herd sheep. It's once again the closest you get to a normal life in the post-apocalypse. In a way, it is a direct comparison to Jackson, where we started our journey. It is revealed that Ellie is still haunted by the PTSD of watching Joel die. And when Tommy shows up saying that he has a lead on where Abby might be, it is a call to action for Ellie. Once again, I wanted so badly for Ellie to give this all up. Dina tells her that she can't keep going on like this, but Ellie, haunted by the memory of Joel's death, refuses to listen and leaves for Santa Barbara anyway. In Santa Barbara, Ellie finds Abby and Lev have been captured by another faction known as the Rattlers. She breaks into their compound, frees a bunch of captives, and eventually finds Abby and Lev tied to stakes on the beach. She releases Abby, and we see her fall to her knees, weak and tired. Abby ignores Ellie and helps to free Lev. They continue down to the beach, where Abby guides Ellie to a pair of boats. Here they plan to escape. Abby tells Ellie she doesn't want to fight anymore, but Ellie is hell-bent on replacing the memory of Joel in her mind in some way. She doesn't believe there's a way to finish this unless she avenges Joel. We have our last fight in the waves of the ocean, and just as Ellie is about to drown Abby, a vision of Joel sitting on the porch appears in her mind and she releases her. What we don't know at the time is that this vision is the last conversation that Ellie ever had with Joel. The memory is of Ellie going to Joel, essentially offering him forgiveness for what he did at St. Mary's. And, in a way, that memory is what drives Ellie to finally forgive Abby. In the flashback, we see Ellie talking to Joel on the front porch, saying that she was supposed to die that night in the hospital, that her life was supposed to matter. Joel says that if the Lord gave him a second chance to live that moment over again, he would make the same choice. Ellie says that she doesn't know if she will ever be able to forgive him for that, but she can try. And she leaves the front porch with a choked up Joel, the last conversation they will ever have. We don't see this flashback until well after the fight when Ellie goes back to the ranch house to find it empty. I think it would have been better placed before the final engagement, so that it was more clear at the time that this memory specifically signifies forgiveness. It makes a second playthrough far more impactful. In fact, most of this game is more impactful after you already know many of the major beats of the story. In the fight with Abby on the beach, Ellie loses 2 of her fingers. The significance is shown after she gets back to the ranch. The house has been cleared out, there is no sign of Dina or JJ, and all of Ellie's things have been tucked away into one room. Ellie opens the guitar case, revealing the guitar that Joel gave her in the beginning of the game, and tries to play a song that Joel taught her. However, when doing so, Ellie is unable to hold the chords with her missing fingers. It is an incredibly sad and dramatic moment. The song he taught her, which throughout the game is used as the song you remember Joel with, is Future Days by Pearl Jam. The lyrics go, "If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself." And in direct parallel to the song, Ellie has literally lost a piece of herself. She has lost Dina, she has lost JJ, she has lost Joel, and she has lost the one piece she had left that Joel gave her, the gift of guitar. Dude, I was weeping. There are so many elements that make this game what it is. Every flashback with Joel is just as touching as the last. Every moment with Abby and the direct parallel to Ellie's story is so effective, so visceral, so impactful. The moral of this story is simple. Violence begets violence, but the beauty of this story is in the complexity of it. It's a deep character study of what it means to seek revenge, what it means to seek redemption, and ultimately what it means to find forgiveness. The metaphors, the symbolism, the repeated imagery of long hallways leading to doors that you don't know what's behind. It all comes together in a masterful way, telling a story that is exciting and bold and, dare I say, groundbreaking. This game is not without its faults. The pacing could use some help. At around the 15 to 18 hour mark, I was feeling the slowness of the combat. I could have used less of that repetition on the Abby half of Seattle. I would have loved to see Abby as the soldier character. I think they executed on this slightly by giving Abby so many options to craft ammunition. However, I wish that Abby was the character that could shoot or punch her way out of a situation, and Ellie is the one that needs to be sneaky. I also think the ending could use some slight tweaks. I would have loved to have 2 endings, one where you follow the button prompts and Ellie actually kills Abby. However, the good ending would be a hidden ending that you only get if you stop pressing the buttons in the fight with Abby. That way, without being prompted, you would have to show that you have learned the lesson that the story is trying to tell. Do you, the player, want to stop the cycle of violence? We ultimately end on a title screen that shows the boat Lev and Abby escaped on, beached on Catalina Island. Abby has made it to the Fireflies, and Ellie is left to find her home in the wilderness of Wyoming. And that's it. The Last of Us Part 2 is a beautiful game. It is a masterpiece. It's an experience. Naughty Dog has taken the bar and placed it on the tallest mountain they can find. 7 years ago, if you asked me what my favorite game is, I would have told you The Last of Us. If you ask me today, I will tell you, it's The Last of Us Part 2. Thanks for watching. I'm Captain Rob, and I hope you all find your light.